Hey, y'all. This your girl, Tony, your girl, Tanetta. I'm here at the Social Worker Coach the podcast, and I'm here to do the next part number 3 for the part on imagination. One of the lessons on imagination. This is in lesson number, hold on, y'all. I've been on vacation, so y'all, I just got back yesterday, day before yesterday, so I'm trying to get back into the groove of things. Been gone for 11, 12 days to Miami and the islands. I'm trying to get back into the group of things, trust me, so I forgot what chapter I was on and everything. But we're in the book, The Law of Success by Napoleon Hill. And this is lesson number 6 called Imagination, and this is part number 3. This is the last part of this, oh crap. Oh no. Okay, this is the last part of this particular chapter. So let's go ahead and get into it, y'all. And make sure that you, of course, are subscribing to my podcast. And, of course, you'll see this on YouTube. So make sure that if you're watching this on YouTube, it's a podcast. Make sure that you, of course, subscribe to my channel on there as well. And it is my name. My channel is my name, Tonetta Clay, because I'm famous, of course. So like I said, definitely check me out on there as well, y'all. And make sure y'all subscribe to the podcast, The Social Worker Coach, wherever you listen to your podcast at. And then, of course, subscribe on YouTube, too. So let's go ahead and get into this, y'all. Like I said, this is Imagination, part number 3. This is the last part in this particular chapter. The man of imagination greeted him in this fashion. I see you are all crippled with rheumatism. What you need is a fine dog to run errands for you. I have a dog here that has been trained to bring home the cows, drive away animals, herd the sheep, and perform other useful services. You may have this dog for $100. All right, said the crippled man. I'll take him. That, too, was imagination. It definitely was. No one wants a dog that someone else wants to get rid of. But anyone would like to own a dog that would herd sheep and bring home the cows and perform other useful services. The dog was the same one that the crippled buyer had refused to buy the day before, but the man who sold the dog was not the man who tried to get rid of him. If you use your imagination, you will know that no one wants anything that someone else is trying to get rid of. Remember that which was said about the law of attraction, through the operation of which like attracts like. If you look and act the part of a failure, you will attract nothing but failures. Whatever your work life may be, it calls for the use of imagination. Niagara Falls was nothing but a great mass of roaring water until a man of imagination harnessed it and converted the wasted energy into electric current that now turns the wheels of industry. Before this man of imagination came along, millions of people had seen and heard those roaring falls, but lacked the imagination to harness them. The first Rotary Club of the world was born in the fertile imagination of Paul Harris of Chicago, who saw in this child of his brain an effective means of cultivating prospective clients and the extension of his law practice. The ethics of the legal profession forbid advertising in the usual way, but Paul Harris, imagination found a way to extend his law practice without advertising in the usual way. If the winds of fortune are temporarily blowing against you, remember that you can harness them and make them carry you toward your definite purpose through the use of your imagination. A kite rises against the wind, not with it. Dr. Frank Crane was a struggling third-rate preacher until the starvation of wages of the clergy forced him to use his imagination. Now he earns upward of $100,000 a year for an hour's work a day, writing essays. Wow. All right, man. I'm like, wow. Bud Fisher once worked for a mere pittance, but now he earns $75,000 a year, making folks grin with his Mutt and Jeff comic strip. Wow. No art goes into his drawings, therefore he must be selling his imagination. Woolworth was a poorly paid clerk in a retail store, poorly paid perhaps he had not yet found out that he had imagination. Before he died, he built the tallest office building in the world and girdled the United States with 5 and 10-cent stores through his use of imagination. And we actually used to go to Woolworth, me and my Aunt Lou back in the day. Rest in peace, Lou, I love you. But like I said, we used to go back in the day when I was a kid. So I remember Woolworth, y'all. Y'all may not, but I do. You will observe by analyzing these illustrations that a close study of human nature played an important part in the achievements mentioned. To make profitable use of your imagination, you must make it give you a keen insight into the motives that cause men to do or refrain from doing a given act. If your imagination leads you to understand how quickly people grant your request, When those requests appeal to their self-interest, you can have practically anything you go after. And I'm glad this book said that because I needed to hear that this morning. I'm sure some of y'all did too. And I'll read that sentence again. If your imagination leads you to understand how quickly people grant your request, when those requests appeal to their self-interest, you can have practically anything you go after. I saw my wife make a very clear sale to our baby not long ago. The baby was pounding the top of our mahogany library table with a spoon. When my wife reached for the spoon, the baby refused to give it up. But a woman of imagination, she offered the baby a nice stick of red candy. He dropped the spoon and immediately centered his attention on the more desirable object, which was the candy. That was imagination. It was also salesmanship. She won her point without using force. I was riding in an automobile with a friend who was driving beyond the speed limit. An officer rode up on a motorcycle and told my friend he was under arrest for speeding. The friend smiled pleasantly at the officer and said, "I'm sorry to have brought you out in all this rain, but I wanted to make the 10 o'clock train with my friend here, and I was hitting it up around 35 miles an hour." "No, you were only going 28 miles an hour," replied the officer. "And as long as you are so nice about it, I will let you off this time, if you will watch yourself hereafter." And that too was imagination. Even a cop will listen to reason when approached in the right manner. But woe unto the motorist who tries to bully the cop into believing his speedometer was not registering properly. There is one form of imagination against which I would caution you. It is the brand which prompts some people to imagine that they can get something for nothing, or that they can force themselves ahead in the world without observing the rights of others. There are more than 160,000 prisoners in the penal institutions of the United States, and I believe there's more today, actually. This book was written back in the 1930s, in that area. Practically every one of whom is in prison, he imagined he could play the game of life without observing the rights of his fellow men. There is a man in the Ohio penitentiary who has served more than 35 years for forgery. And the largest amount he ever got from his misapplication of imagination was $12. Wow. That's a waste of time, actually, but wow. There are a few people who direct their imaginations in the vain attempt to work out a way to show what happens when an immovable body comes in contact with an irresistible force. But these types belong in a psychopathic hospital. There is also another form of misapplied imagination, namely that of a young boy or girl who knows more about life than his or her dad. But this form is subject to modification with time. My own boys have taught me many things that my dad tried in vain to teach me when I was their age. Time and imagination, which is often but the product of time, teach us many things, but nothing of more important than this, that all men are much alike in many ways. If you would know what your customer is thinking, Mr. Salesman, study yourself and find out what you would be thinking if you were in your customer's place. Study yourself, find out what are the motives which actuate you in the performance of certain deeds and cause you to refrain from performing other deeds. And you will have gone far toward perfecting yourself in the accurate use of imagination. The detective's biggest asset is imagination. The first question he asks when called in to solve a crime is, what was the motive? If he can find out the motive, he can usually find the perpetrator of the crime. A man who has lost a horse posted a reward for $5 for his return. Several days later, a boy who was supposed to have been weak-minded came leading the horse home and claimed the reward. The owner was curious to know how the boy found the horse. "How did you ever think where to look for the horse?" he asked, and the boy replied, "Well, I just thought where would I have gone if I had been a horse and went there and he had. Not so bad for a weak-minded fellow." Never take anything for granted, y'all. Some who are not accused of being weak-minded go all the way through life without displaying as much evidence of imagination as this boy did. If you want to know what the other fellow would do, use your imagination. Put yourself in his place and find out what you would have done. That's imagination. Every person should be somewhat of a dreamer. Every business needs the dreamer. Every industry and every profession needs him, but the dreamer must be also a doer, or else he must form an alliance with someone else. I'm sorry, y'all, with someone who can do and does translate the dreams into reality. The greatest nation upon the face of this earth was conceived, born, and nurtured through the early days of his childhood. As the result of imagination in the minds of men who combine dreams with action, Your mind is capable of creating many new and useful combinations of old ideas. But the most important thing it can create is a definite chief aim that will give you that which you most desire. Your definite chief aim can be speedily translated into reality after you have fashioned it in the cradle of your imagination. If you have faithfully followed the instructions set down for your guidance in Lesson 2, you are now well on the road towards success because you know what it is that you want, and you have a plan for getting that what you want. The battle for the achievement of success is half won when one knows definitely what is wanted. The battle is over, except the shouting when one knows what is wanted and has made up his mind to get it, whatever the price may be. The selection of a definite chief aim calls for the use of both imagination and decision. The power of decision grows with use. Prompt decision enforcing the imagination to create a definite chief aim renders more powerful the capacity to reach decisions in other matters. Adversities and temporary defeat are generally blessings in disguise for the reason that they force one to use both imagination and decision. This is why a man usually makes a better fight when his back is against the wall and he knows there is no retreat. He then reaches the decision to fight instead of running. The imagination is never quite so active as it is when one faces some emergency calling for quick and definite decision and action. In these moments of emergency, men have reached decisions, built plans, used their imagination in such a manner that they became known as geniuses. Many a genius has been born out of the necessity for unusual stimulation of the imagination as a result of some trying experience which forced quick thought and prompt decision. It is a well-known fact that the only manner in which an over-pampered boy or girl may be made to become useful is by forcing him or herself to become self-sustaining. This calls for the exercise of both imagination and decision, neither of which would be used except out of necessity. The late Dr. Harper, who was formerly president of the University of Chicago, was one of the most efficient college presidents of his time. He had a penchant for raising funds in large amounts. It was he who induced John D. Rockefeller to contribute millions of dollars to support the University of Chicago. It may be helpful to the student of this philosophy to study Dr. Harper's technique, because he was a leader of the highest order. Moreover, I have his own word for it, and that leadership was never a matter of chance or accident, but always the result of carefully planned procedure. The following incident will serve to show just how Dr. Harper made use of his imagination in raising money in large sums. He needed an extra $1 million for the construction of a new building. Taking inventory of the wealthy men of Chicago, to whom he might turn to for this large sum, he decided upon two men, each who was a millionaire, and both were bitter enemies. One of these men was at the time the head of Chicago's street railway system, choosing the noon hour when the office force, and this man's secretary in particular, will be apt to be out at lunch. Dr. Harper nonchalantly strode into the office and, finding no one on guard at the outer door, walked into the office of his intended victim, whom he surprised by his appearance unannounced. "My name is Harper," said the doctor, "and I'm the president of the University of Chicago. Pardon my intrusion, but I found no one at the outer office, which was no mere accident, so I took the liberty of walking in. I thought of you and your street railway system many times. You have built a wonderful system, and I understand that you have made lots of money for your efforts. I never think of you, however, without it's occurring to me that one of these days you will be passing out into the great unknown, and after you are gone, there will be nothing left as a monument to your name, because others will take over your money, and money has a way of losing its identity very quickly as soon as it changes hands. I have often thought of offering you the opportunity to perpetuate your name by permitting you I have often thought of offering you the opportunity to perpetuate your name by permitting you to build a new hall out on the university grounds and naming it after you. I would have offered you this opportunity a long time ago had it not been for the fact that one of our members of the board wishes to go by X, the streetcar's head enemy. Personally, however, I have always favored you, and I still favor you. If I have your permission to do so, I'm going to try to swing the opposition over to you. I have not come to ask for any decision today. However, as I was just passing and thought it's a good time to drop in and meet you. Think the matter over, and if you wish to talk to me again about it, telephone me at your leisure. Good day, sir. I'm happy to have had this opportunity of meeting you. With this, he bowed himself out without giving the head of the streetcar company a chance to either say yes or no. In fact, the streetcar man had very little chance to do any talking. Dr. Harper did all the talking. That was as he planned it to be. He went to the office and merely to plant the seed, believing that it would germinate and spring into life in due time. His belief was not without foundation. He had hardly turned to his office at the university when the phone rang. The streetcar man was on the other end of the wire. He asked for an appointment with Dr. Harper, which was granted. And the two met in Dr. Harper's office the next morning, and the check for $1 million was in Harper's hand an hour later. Despite the fact that Dr. Harper was a small, rather insignificant-looking man, it was said of him that he had a way about him that enabled him to get everything he went after. And as to say this way that he was reputed to have had, what was it? It was nothing more, nothing less than his understanding of the power of imagination. Suppose he had gone to the office of the streetcar head and asked for an appointment. Sufficient time would have lapsed between the time he called and the time he would have been actually able to see this man, to have enabled the latter to participate for the reason for the call, and also to formulate a good logical excuse for saying no. Suppose again he had opened his interview with the streetcar man something like this. The university is badly in need of funds, and I've come to ask for your help. You have made lots of money. You owe something to the community in which you have made it, which perhaps was true. If you will give us $1 million, we will place your name in a new hall that we wish to build. What might have been the result? I'm sure no. In the first place, there would have been no motive to suggest that was sufficiently appealing to sway the mind of the streetcar man. While it may have been true that he owed something to the community from which he had made a fortune, he probably would not have admitted the fact. In the second place, he would have enjoyed the position of being on the offense instead of on the defense side of the proposal. But Dr. Harper, shrewd in the use of imagination as he was, provided just such contingencies by the way he stated the case. First, he placed the streetcar man on the defensive by informing him that it was not certain that he, Dr. Harper, could get the permission of his board to accept the money and name the hall after the streetcar man. In the second place, he intensified the desire of the streetcar man to have his name on that building because of the thought that his enemy and competitor might get the honor if it got away from him. Moreover, and this was no accident either, Dr. Harper had made a powerful appeal to one of the most common of all human weaknesses by showing the streetcar man how to perpetuate his own name, this legacy, all of which required a practical application of law of imagination. Dr. Harper was a master salesman. When he asked for money, he always paved the way for success by planting in the mind of the man whom he asked it a good sound reason for why the money should be given, a reason which emphasized some advantage accruing to the man as a result of the gift. Often this would take form of a business advantage. Again, it would take on the nature of an appeal to that part of man's nature which prompts him to wish to perpetuate his name so it will live after him. But always, the request for money was carried out according to a plan that had been carefully thought out, embellished and smoothed down with the use of imagination. While the law of success philosophy was in the embryonic stage, long before it had been organized into a systematic course of instruction and reduced to textbooks, the author was lecturing on this philosophy in a small town in Illinois. One of the members of the audience was a young life insurance salesman who had but recently taken up that line of work. After hearing what was said on the subject of imagination, he began to apply what he heard on his own problem of selling life insurance. Something was said during that lecture about the value of applied effort, through which men may enjoy greater success by cooperative effort, through a working arrangement under which each boosts the interest of the other. Taking this suggestion as his cue, the young man in question immediately formulated a plan whereby he gained the cooperation of a group of businessmen who were in no way connected with the insurance business. Going to the leading grocer in his town, he made arrangements with that grocer to give a $1,000 insurance policy to every customer purchasing no less than $50 worth of groceries each month. When he made it a part of his business to inform people of this arrangement and brought in many customers. The grocery man had a large, neatly lettered card placed in his store, informing his customers of the offer of free insurance, thus helping himself by offering all his customers an inducement to all their trading in the grocery line with him. This young, let me see y'all how many pages I got left. I'm trying to make sure. Okay. This young life insurance man then went to the leading gasoline filling station owner in town and made arrangements with him to insure all customers who purchase all their gasoline, oil, and motor supplies from him. Next, he went to the leading restaurant in the town and made a similar arrangement with the owner. Incidentally, this alliance proved to be quite profitable to the restaurant man, who promptly began an advertising campaign in which he stated that his food was so pure, wholesome, and good that all who ate at his place regularly would be apt to live much longer. Therefore, he would insure the life of each regular customer of $1,000. The life insurance salesman then made arrangements with the local builder and real estate man to insure the life of each person buying property from him for an amount sufficient to pay off the balance due on the property in case the purchaser died before payments were completed. This young man in question is now the general agent for one of the largest insurance companies in the United States, with headquarters in one of the largest cities in Ohio, and his income now averages well over $25,000 a year. The turning point in his life came when he discovered how he might make practical use of the law of imagination. There is no patent on his plan. It may be duplicated over and over again by other life insurance men who know the value of imagination. Just know, if I were engaged in selling life insurance, I think I would make use of this plan by allying myself with a group of automobile distributors in each of several cities, thus enabling them to sell more vehicles and at the same time providing the sale of a large amount of life insurance through their efforts. Financial success is not difficult to achieve after one learns how to make practical use of a creative imagination. Someone with sufficient initiative and leadership and the necessary imagination would duplicate the fortunes being made each year by the owners of 5 and 10 cent stores. By developing a system of marketing the same sort of goods now sold in these stores with the aid of vending machines. This will save a fortune in clerk hire, insure against theft, and cut down the overhead of store operation in many other ways. Such a system can be conducted just as successfully as food can be dispensed with the aid of automatic vending machines. The seed of the idea has been sown. It is yours for the taking. Someone who, with an inventive turn of mind, is going to make a fortune and at the same time save thousands of lives each year by perfecting an automatic railroad crossing control that will reduce the number of automobile accidents on crossings. We have that now. The system, when perfected, will work somewhat after this fashion. 100 yards or so before reaching the railroad crossing, the automobile will cross the platform somewhat on the order of a large-scale platform used for weighing heavy objects, and the weight of the automobile will lower a gate and ring a gong. This will force the automobile to slow down. After the lapse of 1 minute, the gate will again rise and the car may continue on its way. Meanwhile, there will have been plenty of time for observation of the track in both directions to make sure that no trains are approaching. Imagination plus some mechanical skill will give the motorist this much needed safeguard and make the man who perfects the system all the money he needs and much more besides. Some inventor who understands the value of imagination and has a working knowledge of the radio principle may make a fortune perfecting a burglar alarm system that will signal police headquarters and at the same time switch on lights and ring a gong in the place about to be burglarized with the aid of an apparatus similar to that now being used for broadcasting. Any farmer with enough imagination to create a plan, plus the use of a list of all automobile licenses issued in the state, may easily work up a clientele of motorists who will come to his farm and purchase all the vegetables he can produce and all the chickens he can raise, thus saving him the expense of hauling his products to the city. By contracting with each motorist for the season, the farmer may accurately estimate the amount of produce he should provide. The advantage to the motorist accruing under the arrangement is that he will be sure of direct from the farm produce at less cost than he could purchase it from local dealers. The roadside gasoline filling station owner can make effective use of imagination by placing a lunch stand near his filling station and then doing some attractive advertising along the road in each direction, calling attention to his barbecue, homemade sandwiches, or whatever else he may wish to specialize on. The lunch stand would cause the motorists to stop, and many of them would purchase gasoline before starting on their way again. These are simple suggestions involving no particular amount of complication in connection with their use. Yet it is just such uses of imagination that bring financial success. The Piggly Wiggly self-help store plan, which made millions of dollars for its originator, was a simple idea which anyone could have adopted, yet considered able, imagination was required to put the idea to work in a practical sort of way. Trying to see how many pages I got left, y'all. That's all. I know I gotta do work too, so I'm trying to make sure I can get this done for y'all. I'm sure I can. I got 25 minutes. Let me see. The more simple and easy adapted to a need and idea is, the greater it is its value, as no one is looking for ideas which are involved with great detail or in any manner complicated. Let me get some water, y'all. Imagination is the most important factor entering into the art of selling. The master salesman is always the one who makes systematic use of imagination. The outstanding merchant relies upon imagination for the ideas which make his business excel. Imagination may be used effectively in the sale of even the smallest article of merchandise, such as ties, shirts, hosiery, etc. Let us proceed to examine just how this may be done. I walked into one of the best-known haberdasheries in the city of Philadelphia for the purpose of chasing some shirts and ties. As I approached the tie counter, a young man stepped forward and inquired, "Is there something you want?" Now, if I had been the man behind the counter, I would not have asked that question. He ought to have known by the fact that I approached the tie counter that I wanted to look at ties. I picked up 2 or 3 ties from the counter, examined them briefly, then laid down all but one, light blue, which somewhat appealed to me. Finally, I laid this one down also and began to look through the remainder of the assortment. The young man behind the counter then had a happy idea. Picking up a gaudy-looking yellow tie, he wound it around his fingers to show what it would look like when tied and asked, "Isn't this a beauty?" Now, I hate yellow ties. The salesman made no particular hit with me by suggesting that a gaudy yellow tie is pretty. If I would have been in that salesman's place, I would have picked up the blue tie for which I had shown a decided preference, and I would have wound it around my fingers so as to bring out its appearance after being tied. I would have known what my customer wanted by watching the kinds of ties that he picked up and examined. Moreover, I would have known the particular tie that he liked best by the time he held it in his hands. A man will not stand by a counter and fondle a piece of merchandise which he does not like. If given the opportunity, any customer will give the alert salesman a clue as to the particular merchandise which should be stressed in an effort to make a sale. I then moved over to the shirt counter. Here I was met by an elderly gentleman who asked, "Is there something I can do for you today?" Well, I thought to myself that if he ever did anything for me, it would have to be today, as I might never come back to this particular store again. I told him I wanted to look at shirts and describe the style and color of shirt that I wanted. The old man made quite a hit with me when he replied by saying, "I'm sorry, sir, but they are not wearing this style this season, so we are not showing it." I said I knew they were not wearing the style for which I had asked, and for that very reason, among others, I was going to wear it, proving I could find it in stock. If there was anything which nettles a man, especially the type of man who knows exactly what he wants and describes it the moment he walks into a store, it is to be told that they are not wearing it this season. Such a statement is an insult to a man's intelligence or to what he thinks is his intelligence, and in most cases is fatal to a sale. If I were selling goods, I might think what I pleased about a customer's taste, but I surely would not be so lacking in tact and diplomacy as to tell the customers that I thought he didn't know his business. Rather, I would prefer to manage tactfully to show him what I believed to be more appropriate merchandise than that for which he called, if what he wanted was not in stock. One of the most famous and highly paid writers in this world has built his fame and fortune on the sole discovery that it is profitable to write about that which people already know and with which they already in accord. The same rule might apply to the sale of merchandise. The old gentleman finally pulled down some shirt boxes and began laying out shirts which were not even similar to the shirt for which I had asked. I told him that none of these suited, and as I started to walk out, he asked if I would like to look at some nice suspenders. Imagine it. To begin with, I did not wear suspenders, and furthermore, there was nothing about my manner or bearing to indicate that I might look at suspenders. We got to pay attention, y'all. It is proper for a salesman to try to interest the customer in wares for which he makes no inquiry, but judgment should be used and care taken to offer something which the salesman has reason to believe the customer may want. I walked out of the store without having bought either shirts or ties and feeling somewhat resentful because I had been so grossly misjudged as to my taste for colors and styles. A little farther down the street, I went to a small one-man shop which had shirts and ties on display in the window. Here, I was handled differently. The man behind the counter asked no unnecessary or stereotyped questions. He took one glance at me as I entered the door, sized me up quite accurately, and greeted me with a very pleasant, "Good morning, sir." He then inquired, "Which shall I show you first, shirt or ties?" I said I would like to look at ties first. He then glanced at the style of shirt I was wearing and asked my size and began laying out shirts of the very type and color for which I was searching, without my saying another word. He laid out 6 different styles, and watched to see which one I would pick up first. I looked at each shirt in turn and laid them all back on the counter. But the salesman observed that I examined one of the shirts a little more closely than others, and that I held it a little bit longer. No sooner than I had laid the shirt down, than the salesman picked it up and began to explain how it was made. He then went to the tie counter and came back with three very beautiful ties, blue ties, of which the very type for which I had been looking for, tied each and held it in front of the shirt, calling attention to the perfect harmony between the colors of the ties and the shirt. Before I had been in the store 5 minutes, I had purchased 3 shirts and 3 ties and was on my way with the package under my arm, feeling that here was a store to which I would return and when I needed more shirts and ties. I learned afterwards that the merchant who owns the little shop where I made these purchases pay a monthly rental of $500 for the small stores and makes a handsome income from the sale of nothing but shirts, ties, and collars. He would have to go out of business with a fixed charge of $500 a month for rent if it were not for his knowledge of human nature, which enables him to make a very high percentage of sales to all who come in his store. I have often observed women when they were trying on hats and have wondered why salespeople do not read the prospective buyer's mind by watching her manner of handling the hats. As a woman goes into the store and asks to be shown some hats, the salesperson starts bringing out hats and the prospective buyer starts trying them on. If a hat suits her, even in the slightest sort of way, she would keep it on for a few seconds or a few minutes, but if she does not like it, she put it right off her head the moment the salesman takes her hand off the hat. Finally, when the customer is shown a hat that she likes, she will begin to announce the fact in terms which no well-informed salesperson will fail to understand by arranging her hair under the hat and pulling it down on her head just to the angle which she likes best, and by looking at the hat from the rear with the aid of a hand mirror. The signs of admiration are unmistakable. Finally, the customer will remove the hat from her head and begin looking at it closely. Then she may lay it aside and permit another hat to be tried on her, in which the clever salesperson will lay aside the hat just removed, and at the opportune time, she will bring it back and ask the customer to try it on again. By careful observation, the customer's likes and dislikes a clever saleswoman may often sell as many as 3 or 4 hats to the same customers at one sitting, primarily watching what appeals to the customer and then concentrating upon the sale of that. The same rule applies in the sale of other merchandise. The customer will, if closely observed, clearly indicate what is wanted. And if the clue is followed, very rarely will the customer walk out without buying. I believe it a conservative estimate when I say that fully 75% of the walkouts, as the non-purchase customers are called, are due to the lack of showing merchandise. Last fall, I went to a hat store to purchase a felt hat. It was a busy Saturday afternoon, and I was approached by a young extra rush hour salesman who had not yet learned how to size people up at a glance. For no good reason whatsoever, the salesman pulled down a brown derby and handed it to me, or rather tried to hand it to me. I thought he was trying to be funny and refused to take the hat into my hands, saying to him in an attempt to return his compliment and to be funny, "Do you tell bedtime stories also?" He looked at me in surprise, but didn't take the cue which I had offered him. If I had not observed the young man more closely than he observed me and sized him up as an earnest but inexperienced extra, I would have been highly insulted. For if there's anything I hate, is a derby of any sort, much less a brown derby. One of the regular salesmen happened to see what was going on, walked over and snatched the brown derby out of the young man's hand, and with a smile on his face, intended as a sort of sop to me, said, "What the hell are you trying to show this gentleman anyway?" That spoiled my fun, and the salesman, who had immediately recognized me as a gentleman, sold me the first hat he brought out. The customer generally feels complimented when the salesman takes his time to study the customer's personality and lay out merchandise suited to that personality. I went into one of the largest men's clothing stores in New York City a few years ago and asked for a suit, describing exactly what I wanted but not mentioning price. The young man, who purported to be a salesman, said he did not believe they carried such a suit, but I happened to see exactly what I wanted hanging on a model and called his attention to the suit. He made a hit with me saying, "Oh, that one over there, that's a high-priced suit." His reply amused me. It also angered me. So I inquired for the young man what he saw about me that indicated I did not come to purchase a high-priced suit. With embarrassment, he tried to explain, but his explanations were as bad as the original offense. I started towards the door, muttering something to myself about dumbbells. Before I reached the door, I was met by another salesman who had since, by the way I walked, and the expression on my face that I was none too well pleased. With tact well worth remembering, this salesman engaged me in a conversation while I unburdened my woes and then managed to get me back to him and look at the suit. Before I left the store, I purchased the suit, and I came in to look at, and two others which I had not intended purchasing. That was the difference between a salesman and one who drove customers away. Moreover, I later introduced two of my friends to the same salesman, and he made sizable sales to each of them. I was once walking down the Michigan Boulevard in Chicago when my eyes was attracted to a beautiful gray suit in the window of a man's store. I had no notion of buying the suit, but I was curious to know the price, so I opened the door and without entering really pushed my head inside and asked the first man I saw how much the suit in the window was. Then followed one of the cleverest bit of sales maneuvering I had ever observed. The salesman knew he could not sell me the suit unless I came into the store, so he said, "Will you step inside, sir, while I find out the price of the suit?" Of course, he knew the price all the time, but this was his way of disarming me of the thought that he intended to try to sell me the suit. Of course, I had to be polite as a salesman, so I said, "Certainly," and walked inside. The salesman said, "Step right this way, sir, and I will get the information for you." In less than 2 minutes, I found myself standing in front of a case with my coat off, getting ready to try on a coat like the one I had observed in the window. After I was in the coat, which happened to fit almost perfectly, which was no accident, thanks to the accurate eyes of an observing salesman. My attention was called to the nice, smooth touch of material. I rubbed my hand up and down the arm of the coat, as I had seen the salesman do, while describing the material, and sure enough, it was a very fine piece of material. By this time, I had asked the price, and when I was told that the suit was only $50, I was agreeably surprised because I had been led to believe that it might have been priced much higher. However, when I first saw the suit in the window, my guess was that it was priced about $35, and I doubt that I would have paid that much for it had it not fallen into the hands of a man who knew how to show the suit to the best advantage. If the first coat tried on me had been about 2 sizes too large or too small, I doubt that any sale would have been made, despite the fact that all ready-to-wear suits sold in the better stores are altered to fit the customer. I bought that suit on the impulse of the moment, as the psychologist would say, and I'm not the only man who buys goods on the same sort of impulse. A single slip on the part of the salesman would have lost him that sale that day. If he had replied $50 when I asked the price, I would have said thank you and had gone my way without looking at the suit. Later in the season, when I purchased 2 more suits from the same salesman, and if I now live in Chicago, the chances are that I will still buy other suits from him because he always showed me the suits that were in keeping with my personality. The Marshall Field store in Chicago gets more merchandise than any other store of its kind in the country. Moreover, because people knowingly pay more at this store, and feel better satisfied than if they bought the merchandise in another store for less money. Why is this? Well, there are many reasons. Among them, the fact that anything purchased at the field store, which is not entirely satisfactory, may be returned in exchange for other merchandise, or the purchase price may be refunded just as the customer wishes. An implied guarantee goes with every article sold in the field store. Another reason why people will pay more at the field store is the fact that the merchandise is displayed and shown to better advantage than it is at most other stores. The field window displays are truly works of art, no less than they are created for the sake of art alone, and not merely to sell merchandise. The same is true of goods displayed in the store. There is harmony and proper grouping of merchandise throughout the field establishment, and this creates an atmosphere that is much, much more than merely an imaginary one. Still, another reason why field store can get more for the merchandise than other merchants is due to the careful selection and supervision of salespeople. One would seldom find a person employed in the field store whom one would not be willing to accept as a social equal or as a neighbor. Not a few men have made the acquaintance of girls in the field store who later become their wives. Merchandise purchased at the field store is picked or packed and wrapped more artistically than is common in other stores, which is still another reason why people go out of their way to pay higher prices to trade there. While we're on the subject of artistic wrapping of merchandise, I wish to relate the experience of a friend of mine, which will not fail to convey a very definite meaning to those engaged in the business of selling, as it shows how imagination may be used in wrapping merchandise. This friend had a very fine silver cigarette case, which he had carried for years, and of which he was very proud of because it was a gift from his wife. Constant usage had banged the case up rather badly. It had been bent, dented, and things warped, etc., until he decided to take it to Caldwell, the jeweler in Philadelphia, to be repaired. He left the case and asked them to send it to his office when it was ready. About 2 weeks later, a splendid-looking new delivery wagon with the Caldwell name on it drew up in front of his office, and a nice-looking young man in a neat uniform stepped out with the package that was artistically wrapped and tied with a ribbon tape string. The package happened to be delivered to my friend on his birthday, and having forgotten about leaving the cigarette case to be repaired and observing the beauty of the size of the package that was handed to him, he naturally imagined that someone had sent him a birthday present. 1 second, y'all. Oh, shoot. What is going on? Okay. His secretary and other workers in his office gathered around his desk to watch him open his present. He cut the ribbon and removed the outer covering. Under this covering was a piece of tissue paper fastened with beautiful gold seals bearing the Caldwell initials and trademark. This paper was removed, and behold, a most beautiful plush-lined box met his eyes. The box was opened, and after removing the tissue paper packing, there was a cigarette case which he recognized after careful examination as the one he had left to be repaired. But it did not look like the same case. Thanks to the imagination of the Caldwell manager, every dent had been carefully straightened out, the hinges had been trued, and the case had been polished and cleaned so it shone as it did when it first was purchased. Simultaneously, a prolonged ooh of admiration came from the onlookers, including the owner of the cigarette case. And the bill, was aplenty, and yet the price charged for the repair did not seem too high. As a matter of fact, everything that entered into the transaction, from the packing of the case with the fine tissue paper cover, the gold seals, the ribbon tape string, the delivery of the package by a neatly uniformed boy from a well-appointed new delivery wagon, was based upon carefully calculated psychology, which laid the foundation for a higher price for the repair. People generally do not complain of high prices, providing the service or embellishment of the merchandise is such as to pave the way for high prices. What people do complain of, and rightly so, is high prices and sloppy service. To me, there was a great lesson in the cigarette case incident, and I think there is a lesson in it for any person who makes a business of selling any sort of merchandise. The goods you are selling may actually be worth all you are asking for them, but if you don't carefully study the subjects of advantageous display and artist packing, you may be accused of overcharging your customers. On Broad Street, in the city of Philadelphia, there is a fruit shop where those who patronize the store are met at the door by a man in uniform who opens the door for them. He does nothing else but merely open the door, but he does it with a smile, even though it be a carefully studied and rehearsed smile, which makes the customer feel welcome even before he gets inside of the store. This fruit merchant specializes on specially prepared baskets of fruit. Just outside the store is a big blackboard on which are listed the sailing dates of the various ocean liners leaving New York City. This merchant caters to people who wish baskets of fruit delivered on board departing boats on which friends are sailing. If a man's sweetheart, or perhaps his wife, and a very dear friend happens to be sailing on a certain date, he naturally wants the basket of fruit he purchases for her to be embellished with frills and trimmings. Moreover, he is not necessarily looking for something cheap or very inexpensive, all of which the fruit merchant capitalizes. He gets from $10 to $25 for a basket of fruit, which one could just purchase around the corner, not more than a block away, between $3 and $7.50, with the exception that the latter would be embellished with the 75 cents worth of frills, which the former contains. This merchant's store is a small fair, no larger than the average small fruit store, but he pays a rent of at least $15,000 a year for the place and makes more money than half a hundred ordinary fruit stands combined, merely because he knows how to display and deliver his wares so they appeal to the vanity of buyers. This is but another proof of the value of imagination. The American people, and this means all of them, not merely the so-called rich or the most extravagant spenders on earth, but they insist on class when it comes to appearances such as wrapping and delivery and other embellishments, which add no real value to the merchandise they buy. The merchant who understands this and has known how to mix imagination with his merchandise may reap a rich harvest in return for his knowledge. And a great many are doing it too. The salesman who understands the psychology of proper display, wrapping, and delivery of merchandise, and who knows how to show his wares to fit the whims and characteristics of his customers can make ordinary merchandise bring fancy prices. And what is more important still, he can do so and still retain the patronage of his customers more readily than if he sold the same merchandise without the studied appeal and the artistic wrapping and delivery service. In a cheap restaurant where coffee is served in heavy, thick cups and silverware is tarnished or dirty, a ham sandwich is only a ham sandwich. And if the restaurant keeper gets 15 cents for it, he is doing well. But just across the street, where the coffee is served in dainty, thin cups, on neatly covered tables by neatly dressed young women, a much smaller ham sandwich will bring a quarter, to say nothing of the cost of the tip to the waitress. The only difference in the sandwiches is merely in appearances. The ham comes from the same butcher and the bread from the same baker, whether purchased from the former or the latter restaurant. The difference in the price is very considerable, but the difference in the merchandise is not a difference of either quality or quantity, so much as it is of atmosphere or appearances. People love to buy appearance or atmosphere. And this is a message to me, I know, because I needed to hear this, actually. I'm sure you may need to hear this too, but I definitely needed to hear this. People love to buy appearance or atmosphere, which is merely a more refined way of saying that which P.T. Barnum said about one being born every minute. It is no overstatement of fact to say that a master of sales psychology could go into the average merchant store where the stocks of goods were worth, let us say, $50,000, and at a very slight additional expense, make the stock bring $60,000 to $75,000. He would do nothing except coach the salespeople on the proper showing of the merchandise. After having purchased a small amount of more suitable fixtures, perhaps, and repacked the merchandise in more suitable coverings and boxes. A man's shirt packed one to the box, and in the right sort of box with a piece of ribbon and a sheet of tissue paper added for embellishment can be made to bring $1 or $1.50 more than the same shirt will bring without the more artistic packaging. I know this is true, and I have proven it more times than I can recall, to convince some skeptical merchant who has not studied the effect of proper displays. Conversely stated, I have proven many times that the finest shirt made cannot be sold for half its value if it's removed from its box and placed on a bargain counter with inferior looking shirts, both of which examples prove that people do not know what they're buying, that they go more by appearances than they do by the actual analysis of the merchandise they purchase. This is noticeably true in the purchase of automobiles. The American people want and demand style and the appearance of automobiles. What is under the hood or in the rear axle, they do not know and really do not care, as long as the car looks the part. Henry Ford required nearly 24 years of experience to learn the truth of the statement just made, and even then, despite all of his analytical ability, he only acknowledged the truth when forced to do so by his competitors. If it were not true that people buy appearances more than they buy reality, Ford never would have created his new automobile. That car is the finest sort of example of a psychologist who appeals to the tendency which people have to purchase appearance. Although, of course, it must be admitted that in this particular example, the real value of the car really does exist. And I think that's the end. Yes, that's the end of that chapter on imagination. That was chapter number 6, y'all, in the book, The Law of Success by Napoleon Hill. Like I said, definitely this was a very interesting chapter. It made me think a lot about my cookie business that I have here in Southern Arizona and the things that I was doing in the past with coaching and stuff like that, because I kind of took that out of the box for right now until I get some more things in place. So like I said, this definitely made me think about some of the things I need to implement. I guess I put it that way. When it comes to business, using your imagination and making sure that you're catering to what the people want and not just what I want at all. I guess I put it that way. So with that, y'all, I want to say thank y'all for tuning in. Again, this is Tonetta Clay here at the Social Worker Coach Podcast. And this is one of my Black Girl Reads, I guess, segments. Of course, because I do want to make sure that I'm reading. Like I said, I'm growing all the time. And I want to make sure that when I'm growing and what I'm reading, that you all can, of course, get a snippet of those things as well. If not the whole book, like you will get this one too. Because I know, of course, reading is fundamental, of course, as they say back in the day. But reading, there's also all types of business lessons, all types of lessons of all sorts, secrets, all types of stuff that you can learn that's hidden in books is what I was always told. So like I said, definitely this is one of the books that I'm reading to y'all. I started off doing the, what's it called? Doing the summaries. So like I said, this is the whole chapter of imagination. But like I said, I started off doing the summaries, which is still fine. But like I said, I definitely want to start reading this to y'all so y'all can get everything that I'm reading as well. And even more, especially if you're using your imagination like I just read for lesson number 6. So with that, this is your girl, Tonetta Clay again, with the Social Worker Coach. Make sure that you all are subscribing to, of course, the podcast, wherever you listen to your podcast episodes. And then, of course, make sure that you're, of course, if you're seeing this on YouTube, make sure that you're subscribing to my YouTube channel as well. And then, of course, no matter where you're looking at this or listening to this, make sure that you share out to people, to individuals who may want to hear this. And and not just who may want to hear this, but who have a business and they're trying to figure out what's going on and how to, of course, grow that business and still and grow themselves as well at the same time. So with that, I want to say thank you all. Peace out, y'all. I'll see y'all on the next episode. Take care.